The Dallas Cowboys, oh man. Well, all I can say is they had yet another successful regular season campaign, going 12-5 for the second consecutive year, or is it the third? I don't know. But either way, they had another successful regular season campaign behind yet another MVP season, like from quarterback Dak Prescott, and another strong defense. That defense, that pass rush, that secondary. It was an overall strong defensive effort, as it seemed like they were finally putting the pieces together for a serious title run and finally making the NFC Championship appearance that pretty much everyone keeps bugging them about. The NFC title game that they've never been to in the last 30 years. However, with all that being said, none of that mattered again in the playoffs. But this time, it was more humiliating. It was much more embarrassing than their last two playoff losses. And this one, they got fucked in the ass so hard that nearly everyone was leaving after the third quarter. They got their ass whooped by the 7th-seeded Green Bay Packers at home in one of the worst, if not the worst, playoff losses in their history. Rough. Just absolutely rough when you think about it. So they get their ass whooped by the Packers at home, and now you start to wonder, like, what are they ever going to get it done? Are they ever going to get it done? Especially when you consider that Dak Prescott is entering a contract extension negotiations, or could be entering the last year of his deal, why isn't Mike McCarthy getting fired for this shittiness? And is Jerry Jones going to do anything? So many questions on whether or not these Cowboys can ever get it done. Again, and again, and again. So, when you look at this Cowboys offseason, there really wasn't a lot of what they did because, well, of financial constraints and pretty much whether or not they were going to re-sign Dak Prescott to a big fat contract extension. So, some of the things that they did do that wasn't related to that was they went out to hire former Vikings head coach Mike Zimmer to replace Dan Quinn as defensive coordinator. Not because, Dan Quinn sucked at his job, but Dan Quinn had departed to become the new head coach for the Washington Commanders. So, obviously, with that change, they have to bring in a new new defensive coordinator, mind you. And then, because they didn't have a lot of money to spend, and because of the contract negotiation with Dak, they didn't really have a lot of players that they either couldn't resign or they had to let go. But they did resign at least one or two players, like Rico Dowdle at running back and corner CJ Goodwin. But that was pretty much it. So they also released receiver Michael Gallup, who unfortunately with that torn ACL a couple years ago, he slowed down. He slowed down a little bit. And I think for whatever reason lost trust with Dak. I don't know why. But anyway, he ends up going to the Raiders later on. And they also released linebacker Leighton Vander Esch, who unfortunately had his career ended with a neck injury early in last year's season, which sucks. You never want your career to end like that. It's just very unfortunate. So he gets released and then he retires. So that's very unfortunate. So when you look at these Cowboys, obviously, you know how it goes for them pretty much year and year and year. At this point, if you're a Cowboys fan or just like someone that loves to roast them, my only goal for them this year is like just do something damn meaningful if you make the playoffs. And that's if, again, you do make the playoffs. Like, you've been to the divisional playoffs. You reached there like how many times now? Ever since Dak has been there. And yet you can't get it done for whatever reason. You can't reach to the promised land, which is the NFC Championship game. Like, I really don't get it. So anyway, to try and get to that point, it's questionable. It's really questionable though, because look at what you've lost. You've lost Tony Pollard to the Titans, but more on him in a bit. And then you've lost a significant amount of power in your offensive line, like Tyron Smith to the Jets, Tyler Blasdaz to the Commanders. And then defensively, there's some key losses there as well, like Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler to the division rival Commanders. And then when you look at some of their additions, there were only two. And they weren't really strong ones either. Like Ezekiel, you bring back Ezekiel Elliott from the Patriots, so a little reunion there. But Ezekiel Elliott, I don't know. He hasn't been the same. It hasn't been the same since leaving Dallas. And then you bring linebacker Eric Kendricks from the Chargers. He should be a little bit of help, I guess, to replace Lane Vander Esch. But they tried to do something in the draft at least, like getting Tyler Guyan from Oklahoma at tackle, an edge rusher, Martin Nealon from Western Michigan, guard Cooper Beebe from Kansas State, and getting a receiver by the name of Ryan Flournoy from Southeastern Missouri State. So when you look at the Dallas Cowboys this past offseason and how does it translate over to 2024? There's two things I could say. Their one stout offensive line, they're gonna endure some pains pretty much all year because, like I said, two of their starters in Tyron Smith and Tyler Blasdaz, they're gone. They left in free agency, and sure they still have Tyler Smith at guard. They still have Zach Martin at center and Terrence Steele also at guard. At least your interior is set, but your exterior is going to be a little bit of an issue because you have these rookies. Cooper Beebe is at guard, and then Tyler Guyan is going to be where Tyron Smith was. So they're still going to have a serious adjustment period, and you know what that means for Dak Prescott? He's going to have to ditch that ball quick. There have been plenty of instances of where Dak Prescott really struggles when he doesn't have his full complementary offensive line at his disposal. So it's going to be a little bit of a rough transition period for this once stout Cowboys offensive line. And then defensively, there are concerns with this Dallas run defense, and which is a little surprising considering that it really struggled last year. And I was wondering why they didn't address it because, considering that they got gashed on the ground, and they also allowed Jordan Love to really let that ball out, which is why they got their ass whooped in that playoff game back in January. Oh, I mean, I get it. They did address that in the 7th round, but there still isn't much there. There still isn't much interior defensive tackles to stop the run or generate any pressure from the inside against opposing quarterbacks going into this fall. Again, I might be wrong. There might be someone there that can step up to the plate. But as it stands now, there's nobody. There's nobody there. So when you look at some of their schedule this year, looking at some of their key games, they start on the road against the Cleveland Browns and that vaunted defense. And then they come home, they at home, week 3 against the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson. And then a rematch of sorts in that controversial week 17 game against the Lions. They face them in a rematch. And then coming off their bye week in week 8, they go to San Francisco again to take on the 49ers. It should be an interesting game considering how that went last year and in the year before that in the playoffs. So should be an interesting one. Should be kind of a interesting schedule for the Dallas Cowboys, especially in the first half of the year. So for Dallas, there's a lot of things to be concerned about with this team. Not just with Dak, not just their offensive line, but yeah, a lot of concern comes from their offense. Like, where's the ground game going to come from? Last year, Tony Pollard was handling the starting role, but when you look back at some of his highlights, he didn't handle the starting role as well as most people thought. So now he's on the Titans. He left in free agency. Ezekiel Elliott's back there, but he's had a very mixed tenure in New England, and they re-signed Rico Dowell, but we don't know too much about him, at least from an outsider's perspective. So it's going to be interesting how that ground game is going to work out. And if it does work out, good for them. But we still have some things to figure out there. And then at the receiver spot, who's going to be that downfield threat to help out CeeDee Lamb? Like, who's going to be that number 2 option? Because most thought it was going to be Brandon Cooks, but that wasn't the case because he was very inconsistent all year last year. And there weren't many reliable options besides those two. So is it going to be that that other guy, that Ryan guy from Southeastern Missouri State. Who knows? Who knows? But they don't really have many other receiving options besides CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks. You're gonna need more than that. So the Cowboys, when you look overall heading into 2024, they certainly lost a lot of pieces. But I feel like they still did a decent job in trying to replace some of them, but not enough of a job to try to put them together and see, are they still going to compete in the playoffs? That's hard to say. In my opinion, though, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting how their schedule plays in their favor, especially when you have a rebuilt offensive line, the run defense, the running game, and Dak Prescott playing against quality competition. Sure, they're still in a kind of weak NFC because they play the NFC South. They have a couple opponents that are kind of but they could run into some trouble securing a playoff spot, let alone snatching the NFC East from the team that took it from them last year. Then the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Cowboys, again, they could run into some trouble if they can't overcome their serious issues that I noted earlier.